the challenge for me is I know many of you have heard me speak in the past. Some of you have not. Some of you have read the book, Power of Pull. Others have not. So I'm going to just try to skim across a whole lot of topics with the emphasis on trying to be as provocative as I can to stir up some good conversation and discussion. And what I love about the way this has been set up is it will flow based on what your interests, what your questions are, what topics you really want to explore. So broadly, I wanted to just start with a notion of what I call the dark side of technology. I come from Silicon Valley, and in Silicon Valley there's a standard script where you basically showcase, demo some really powerful new technology and then spend the rest of the talk exploring all the opportunities that are created by the technology. I think that's important to understand for sure, and so I've done my share of that, but I also think there's what I call a dark side to the technology, which is that we are, as a result of digital technology infrastructures, shaping a world that has one key feature, and that is mounting performance pressure on all of us. It is reducing barriers to entry and barriers to movement across the world. The one example I like to give of that is a billboard that was actually up in Silicon Valley for many years, and it just framed a simple question, which was, how does it feel to know that there are at least 1 million people around the world who can do your job? Kind of focuses the mind that increasingly we are in a global world where we're all connected, and if we individually are not keeping up, not staying ahead as best we can, we will fall behind. And so I think that's a dimension that we might want to explore a bit. One of the things that I think this what we call the big shift is creating is a move from a world of push to a world of pull. And what we mean by that is basically that in the past, historically, over at least the past century, if not longer, we've had a very simple model of institutions, which is a push-based model. Essentially, you develop a forecast or prediction of where demand is going to be, and then you make sure you have all the right people and the right resources in the right place at the right time to meet that demand. You pushed everything to meet the demand. Increasingly, for a variety of reasons I won't go into at the moment, but I'm of the belief that we are going to shift to a fundamentally different model, which is a pull-based model. And it has to do with creating scalable platforms where you can draw out people and resources when you need them and where you need them. And just briefly, we focus on 3 levels of pull that are becoming important. One level of pull, probably the most basic one, is just the ability to access resources. Classic illustration is Google. I can't recall what we did before Google in terms of accessing information, a very powerful pull-based tool. But it assumes that you have a question. Increasingly in this world that we're facing of higher uncertainty, we're not even sure what questions to ask, what to look for. And in that kind of world, there's a second level of pull that becomes even more important, and that's the ability to attract. It's what generally it goes under the rubric of serendipity, those unexpected encounters that when you have them, you say, oh my God, that was so valuable. That gave me an idea that I just hadn't been thinking about, but is very relevant to the problem I'm working on. Most people have the view that serendipity is pure luck. It happens when it happens, and the only thing you can do is be prepared for it. In the words of Louis Pasteur, when it happens, be prepared to take full advantage of it, but that's all you can do is serendipity. I actually have a strong view that we have the opportunity to shape serendipity, to increase both the probability and the quality of those unexpected encounters through choices we make every day in our lives. And so that's a second level of pull that becomes more valuable. And then ultimately there's a third level of pull, which is drawing out of each of us our full potential. And it's a process of learning. And it's leveraging those other two levels of pull, the access and attract, so that we can learn even faster and achieve even more of our potential. And ultimately, this whole notion of learning is a core theme in all the work we've been doing. That increasingly, that is the opportunity and the challenge. How do we learn faster in a world that's being driven by exponential technologies? And ultimately leads to a view that our institutions, all our institutions, which were organized around push and around essentially a scalable efficiency model. The reason we have institutions of all sizes is because it's easier and lower cost to coordinate activity within an institution than across institutions. Again, for at least a century, that was the rationale. I'm of the belief that that rationale is becoming less and less compelling. As a result of digital technology infrastructures, we can coordinate activity across the world, across thousands, hundreds of thousands, even millions of participants and institutions. So if that's not the rationale, if that's not why we have institutions, what is the rationale? And there are some who believe that we're going to go into a world of independent free agents. We'll all become independent and basically loosely affiliate when needed to do whatever we need to do. I'm not of that camp. I believe we still will have significant institutions, large institutions. But I believe it'll be driven by a very different rationale, which is the rationale of scalable learning. That the reason we will join together in institutions of various types is because we'll learn faster as part of an institution than we ever could on our own individually. But that's a fundamental transition. And I think the scalable efficiency models we have today in all our institutions are fundamentally hostile to a notion of scalable learning. So it truly requires a fundamental transformation of the institutions to realize that rationale. Scalable efficiency to scalable learning. One of the core themes that has emerged in our work as you think about scalable learning, if you're really committed to learning as rapidly and as broadly as possible in this kind of world of mounting pressure, what are the ingredients? What are the elements that can help to drive that learning? One of the elements, we believe, is the notion of passion. If you're not truly passionate about what you're doing, there is no way you will learn as quickly and as effectively as somebody who is passionate. And so my advice to people who are doing their job because they need the money or the pay, simply treating it as work, is find something else quickly. Because if all you're doing is doing a job, you will be under mounting pressure, you'll be under more and more stress, and over time you'll ultimately burn out and drop out. So the only way to stay successful in this kind of world is to find a passion, connect to it, and amplify it over time. We came to the whole topic of passion by looking at environments where you see sustained extreme performance improvement. And we looked across a whole range of very diverse areas. A lot of attention in extreme sports, big wave surfing, extreme skiing, sports arenas where people are pushing the limits constantly, trying to get to that next level of achievement. We looked at online video gaming, World of Warcraft, and other kinds of high-pressure environments where literally the price of not learning is you die. At least virtually you die. And what we found, despite all the diversity of those arenas, when we looked for common elements, the one common element we saw was passion. Every participant in those arenas was deeply, deeply passionate about what they were doing. And we found, and again, this is a subject we can go into more conversation around, because from my experience, everybody, when you say the word passion, kind of nods their head, and yeah, okay, we're talking the same language. We're not usually talking the same language. Everybody has a slightly different interpretation or meaning attached to passion. The kind of passion that we saw in these environments was basically what I describe as the passion of the explorer. And it has three components to it. One is a deep, long-term commitment to a domain, a large domain. And it's the commitment not just to be in the domain, not just to learn about the domain, but to make a difference in that domain. And not just one act of making a difference, but an act of increasing difference over time. So long-term commitment to a domain, key element in this passion. The second element is what we call a questing disposition. It's a notion of what's your reaction when you're presented with an unexpected challenge. Most of us in the work environment, traditional work environments, those unexpected challenges, first of all, we try to ignore them. Sometimes they'll go away if you wait long enough. If they don't go away, you maybe try to paper them over, hide them. If that doesn't work, you try to kludge your way through that challenge. But your key goal is to get back to your assigned task. The person with a questing disposition has a very different mindset and reaction. It's excitement. It's, wow, I never saw that before. How would I do that? What could I do? This is an opportunity to test myself to get to that next level. And in fact, the passionate explorers don't just wait for those unexpected challenges, they actively seek them out. And if they can't find them, they leave. They go somewhere else, they get bored. So they're constantly looking for that next challenge, that quest. And then the third element is what we call a connecting disposition. And basically in this context, the connecting disposition is what's your reaction when you're faced with one of those challenges. Some of us have a tendency to want to go off into a corner and try to figure it out ourselves and get back with the answer. The connecting disposition, no, the first orientation of the passionate explorer is who else can I connect to? Who else can I find who has some relevant expertise or experience or just shares this passion and will work with me to try to solve that challenge? Very different orientation, but those three together, long-term commitment to a domain, the questing disposition, and the connecting disposition. If you think about accelerated learning, that's a powerful combination. You will learn very rapidly if you bring those three elements together. And so it's why we put a lot of emphasis on the increasing importance of passion as a way of surviving and thriving in this world that we're facing. So, passion, one question is, well, how does passion emerge? How can you nurture passion? How can you catalyze it? There are many different possible approaches there. I wanted to talk about, again, just in the interest of putting it on the table as a potential for further discussion, is the role that narrative can play in nurturing passion, catalyzing passion. And in this context, I make a distinction, even though I know most people use stories and narratives completely interchangeably. They're the same, they mean the same thing. I draw a distinction between, on the one hand, a story, at least the way I interpret it, is a self-contained entity. It has a beginning, a middle, and a resolution. Stories resolve. And secondly, stories are about me, the storyteller, or they're about those people out there. They're not about you. I mean, you could imagine what you would have done in that same situation or that context, but the story is not about you. It's about me or those people over there. Interesting difference in a narrative is that narratives are open-ended. There is no resolution yet. It's to be determined. And the resolution hinges on you, on the choices you're going to make, the actions you're going to take. What's it going to be? You will shape the outcome of this narrative. A very different way of engaging with people. And I will never underestimate the emotional engagement around stories. But what I like to say to point out the power of narrative is that throughout history, millions of people have given their lives for narratives. They have made the ultimate sacrifice. You want to talk about engagement? Narratives engage. And so I think it's an interesting thing to focus on in terms of if you want to build long-term commitment to a domain, narratives typically are very long-run outcomes far in the future, so they tend to stimulate that kind of long-term commitment if you buy into the narrative. Narratives typically have a really interesting opportunity at the end, a possibility that's out there, but huge challenges along the way. It's not a given that that opportunity is going to materialize. Again, it's up to you, and you're going to face some real challenges along the way. But now those challenges become exciting because there's such an opportunity at the end of the road. And narratives tend to be shared by many people, and so you get that connecting disposition. You have a lot of people who are joining in over time. I don't think it's accidental that every successful social movement throughout history has been driven by a very powerful narrative. So I'm increasingly interested in exploring what a narrative is, how they emerge, and how they can be expanded over time. I think just also put on the table narratives, we can think about narratives at three levels, at least three levels. One is an individual narrative. What is your individual narrative? Most of us have not taken the time to reflect and articulate what our narrative is. But I believe that if you look at the choices and actions you've taken throughout your life, there is a narrative implicit in those choices and actions. It's sometimes very helpful to make it explicit and reflect on it. Is it the right narrative? Is it the narrative that really is going to maximize what I want to accomplish in life? You can think about narratives at an institutional level. You know, as a company or an organization, what is your organizational narrative? And I will say in that context that when I talk to executives about organizational narratives, I often get the response, oh, I've got a narrative. Our company has a narrative. You know, we started in a very humble beginnings in a garage somewhere, and we faced incredible challenges and obstacles. We accomplished amazing things, and there's so much more ahead. You know, just stay tuned. It's open-ended. Lots more to be done. What I point out about that kind of approach is that's a narrative about the company. It's not a narrative about the people you're trying to engage with. What is the narrative at that level? And very few organizations, I believe, have really effective narratives around that. Narratives, I think, are an interesting vehicle and tool to think about in terms of trying to achieve change and trying to mobilize and ignite passion in a broad group of people. I'll just finish with one other topic, which is something that we've spent a fair amount of time on as well, which is the whole question of organizational change. If we're right about this perspective that we're in this big shift that is going to require reinventing all the institutions that we know and love, that's fundamental organizational change. I've been involved in organizational change now for over 30 years. I only have one lesson to share with you from that 30 years of experience. And that lesson is that if you think that organizational change is a rational process, you've already lost. If you think it's about getting the right data, doing the right analytics, putting it into the right charts, and presenting it to the right people, you've lost. My lesson is, from all my experience at least, that organizational change at the end of the day is fundamentally a political process. And it has three components to it, and only three. One is to identify and neutralize the enemies of change. And neutralize by any means necessary. And identifying them is not always obvious, because from my experience, again, in change initiatives in large organizations, you can get people around a table like this and present the need for change, the imperative for change, and have everybody smile and nod around the table. Say, yes, you're absolutely right. And then go into their offices and plot how they're going to destroy this change effort. So identifying the enemies of change is a non-trivial exercise. The second key goal in this is to identify and strengthen the champions of change, wherever possible and however possible. And then the third goal is I'm heavily influenced by the art of war. And a key lesson from the art of war is that if you have to engage the enemy in battle, you've already lost the war. So avoid the direct confrontation with the enemies of change as long as possible so that you can neutralize them as much as possible and strengthen the champions of change as much as possible before engaging in that direct confrontation. So, maybe I should stop while I'm ahead there and give you guys a chance to reflect and eat, and let me know which topics. And by the way, I'm happy to talk about any other topics that might be on your mind, even if I haven't covered them. Thank you very much.